Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're super blessed to have an opportunity to speak with Debbie from Shelby's Rules. When Chloe and I were setting up this webinar, it was exciting to hear what Shelby's Rules was all about and what they offered, because it's going to piggyback really nicely off of what we learned at our fall conference earlier this month with Ray Lozano and Daniel from North Point Recovery, just really driving home how we need to be cognizant of how we are dealing with our youth populations and continue to stay motivated to make sure that we don't get complacent. Complacency is a really big thing that can hurt a lot of parents and communities when you think, not my child. And it really could be any of our kids at any given moment. So continuing to have opportunities to share these experiences that others have had is very, very important to making sure that it is not our child, and that less children, less adults, less people have stories of how some substance abuse has impacted their life to the point where it will never be the same. So with that being said, I will pass it off to Debbie. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. Hi. So what I'm planning to do is to show you the presentation that I give to children. Typically, I go and I present to junior high and high school kids, and I've done this throughout our nation and even New Zealand. And so usually when I first start off, I play a video. And this video shows my daughter, which I'll show you right now. This was Shelby. It's a CD that shows her life, pictures to music. It really draws the kids into their world, because she shows that I am what you are right now. I was. And then the next segment of it shows actual text messages from the night, all through the night, while she was dying, actually, and some of the misinformation that our teenagers have that think that somebody will be okay. And that really draws them in, because they are seeing what they know more so than what we know as parents. And then the last segment of the 10-minute or 5 to 10 minute video is two of Shelby's friends on the Steve Wilco show. But one in particular is on stage. Alyssa was with Shelby that night, and they are talking to a young girl from New York who goes out every night and parties and blacks out most of the time. And Alyssa is there talking to her and explaining that, you don't understand what you're doing and how quickly your life could be lost. And at the end, the girl says, wow, I never knew anyone who lost anyone from just drinking, which is a common thought that we have in our society, in our world. And she definitely walked away with, listening to this information. And hopefully, we never found out the follow-up on that, but hopefully changed some of her ways of how she was making choices in this world. So after the video plays, then usually I come on stage either without an announcement. It just depends on the school whether they want to announce me or not. It works better sometimes by just having me come out. Many times the kids expect that Shelby's going to come out and talk to them, but instead it's my voice talking, and it is my daughter telling her story to them through me. And so I introduce myself, and I just go right into letting them know that on December 20th, 2008, the first night of Christmas break, 5 days before Christmas, my beautiful 17-year-old daughter died of acute alcohol poisoning. I asked them to please remember these words: acute alcohol poisoning, or alcohol poisoning for short. And when you go home, learn everything and anything you can about it, because it's more important for you, the youth of our world, because it's your life that is at the highest risk of dying simply because of your age. I let them know I'm not here for myself. Of course, my time has passed, and I'm not here for my Shelby. It's too late for her. I'm here for you. I'm here for you and your family and your future families. Shelby would have been teaching the world of teens this message if she had survived that night, because that's how she was. She cared about people and she loved life. And as a mother, I tell them I just can't even, tell you how much my children meant to me from the moment I knew I had them. And I always cared about them so much, and we lived life with a lot of fun, but always with safety in mind first. My husband and I had lost our first baby unexpectedly to sudden infant death syndrome, so you better believe that this set of parents were very careful to make sure that our children were always safe. But the world, life hit us again, unfortunately. And I tell them that's why I'm sending out, and I throw out into the audience what I call Shelby seeds of education. I look into everybody's eyes, whether I have a couple of students or thousands of students, and I throw out these seeds, and I tell them it's in the hope that if just one seed, one person today learns what I'm about to share with them, then I know that'll be another person in this world that will survive, if not many more, as in my mind, the branches, the information of that seed grows through people teaching each other. And my hope is that someday we never have to hear of another child dying of alcohol poisoning in our world, the most important people in our world. I usually then thank our administration for inviting me, and today I'll thank you guys. Shelby's untimely and ultimately preventable death has devastated my family, of course. And although now it's 13 years later, to me, it's always the first day. The pain never goes away. You live with it, and I think of my beautiful daughter all the time, just like I would if she was still here. And while we understand that underage drinking is a terrible problem, I'm a realist. I know that it's been occurring, why it's been happening for many, many years. And unfortunately, I participated in it myself as a youth. But I wish I had known what I know now and what I'm sharing. It would have made a huge difference in some of the choices that I made at that time. It is unclear exactly what happened to Shelby that night, as many have chosen not to talk, not to tell this grieving mother and her grieving family every little piece of information of what happened to my daughter that night. But we do know this. We know that Shelby and her friend Alyssa arrived at a home at 20 till 1 in the morning. They were invited to a home where there was a party in progress, where there was a set of parents. There was a 21-year-old sister and a 20-year-old sister home for the holidays, and approximately 3 or 4 of their friends. They were invited by a friend, one of their friends, to come to the home. We know that the girls started drinking too. And we know that Shelby consumed the amount of alcohol she was to consume that night within 1 hour's time. We know that she almost immediately became violently ill, which is very common with alcohol poisoning. And so violent that she hit her head trying to vomit on a porcelain toilet. Not once, but more than once. It was the first thing I saw on my daughter's face that morning, on her body. Split lip, bleeding, a bruised cheek. And I asked myself, what happened to my daughter's beautiful face? What happened at this home? We know that at this time, after Shelby was sick, that she went unconscious and she was propped up at that same toilet, and they left her, and they left her. I asked the children, please remember this. Never, ever leave a person who is in trouble with alcohol alone, not even for a second. Why? It's really simple. It can mean the difference between life or death, and it can happen within minutes, or it can take many hours, like it did with my daughter through the night. She was experiencing every single symptom you can have with alcohol poisoning, but you just have to have one and you can die. When she was discovered the next morning by Alyssa, she could not be revived, despite the fact that her body, that was healthy body, that was fighting so hard to remain in this world that she loved, still had a heartbeat. She never even had a chance to make it to the ER, to the emergency room, where she would have been saved, because alcohol poisoning is almost 100% preventable. But the only way to save that victim is through medical means. That's the only way to save them. In my initial grieving hours, as I started to learn more about this thing, alcohol poisoning, that killed my daughter, I had heard of it, sure, but I really didn't know about it. My vision was kind of like, oh yeah, it's that thing that those college students do, pouring gallons and gallons of gasoline, or, well, it actually is ethanol, like gasoline, but pouring gallons and gallons of alcohol down their throat. Of course, something is going to happen at some point. Never really knowing exactly what it was. And as I learned really what it was and how simple of a lesson it would be to learn to teach about it, I asked myself, how did I miss this? After all, I was raised with alcohol all around me. I was raised with a father whose second job was the piano player, and my mother loved to entertain. And of course, that involved adults and alcohol. But in those days, here's a difference. You never would have seen one of those adults serving alcohol to a child. And I also was raised in a law enforcement family. And I had a very open father who taught us about the good and the bad in this world and the experience of his job. And so I learned very young that, I don't want anything bad that happens out in that world to happen to me or anybody that I love. And I was the daughter that followed in my father's footsteps. I had a 10-year career in law enforcement. And again, I learned a lot more about some of the unfortunately bad things that happen out in our world, and never wanted that to happen to me or anybody that I loved. And, I also was a teen and knew the party scene. And I had a good 10 years of being single too. And again, I knew the young adult party scene, but I never knew this. How did I miss this? And then it hit me. With all the time and experience around alcohol, I had never known a person to die from a couple of drinks of alcohol in just a few hours' time. And neither had my parents. As I talked to teens, I came to realize that most of them have no clue that drinking just a few too many swallows of alcohol can kill you. But shockingly, I came to realize that most adults have no clue to the dangers of alcohol poisoning. Myself was included on that list. In fact, a lot of professions who you would think would know the ins and outs, cops, firemen, after all, they're the ones being called sometimes when something goes wrong. But I found they really didn't know the ins and outs of it either. There is one profession that knows, though, and that's our medical profession, our ER staff. Why? Well, they've been seeing this for many, many, many years, but we don't hear about it. Usually when we hear of an alcohol poisoning case, it's either a sorority or a fraternity situation. We don't hear of the thousands, hundreds and hundreds that we lose in our nation. And now college has come down to high school and junior high, unfortunately. And remember, the younger you are, the more at risk you are of dying. Sure, we know that excessive drinking can make us sick and make us do embarrassing things sometimes and leave us with a headache and a nasty hangover. In fact, in my time, that was probably the most worrisome thing. Oh, I hope I don't have a hangover tomorrow. Never knowing myself that if you have a hangover, what actually is happening is you were alcohol poisoned the night before, and now your body is working on recovery for you. That was a pretty shocking thought for me to find out, and I'll go more into that a little later here. And we also know that after many years of drinking, you can damage your organs and eventually die. And of course, through the years, many years, we have learned so much about drinking and driving and how you can die that way. And many of us remember, especially in my time, just letting them sleep it off. But we had no idea how easily that friend might have slipped into a coma and died, or vomit in their sleep and choke to death and die. Especially if the style of drinking is binge drinking. Not binge drinking from my time. That was usually the alcoholic father who, as they said, went out on a binge. He would be on his binge drinking, then come home for weeks with his family, sober up, and then go out on his binge again. Many adults, when they used to hear binge drinking, would think of that kind of drinking. I'm talking about binge drinking of today, the youth party scene that has changed, that many of you probably know, has changed so much drastically from my time. Binge drinking, definition: large amounts of alcohol in a short period of time, meaning 2 hours, 1.5 hour, 1 hour, 30 minutes. And that large amount of alcohol can actually be half of what's in this little 8-ounce bottle of water. I learned that nowadays the alcohol of choice among our youth is vodka. It made me chuckle at first because in my day, that was the old man's drink. And drinking with shots as you get drunk quicker, and that is the goal now. Drink to get drunk. No longer the days like mine where it was just a little living on the edge, mainly socializing. Drink to get drunk, drink to puke, drink to pass out. Drinking games have become extremely popular. In fact, there's games I read where you can mark your wrist as you're drinking, and you're drinking to puke, and you're drinking to pass out. And you find out who the winner is if you wake up the next morning by seeing who has the most marks. Drinking games, they've become so popular, but unfortunately they create a more aggressive, fast way of drinking, competitive drinking. And that creates the higher chance of being an alcohol poisoning victim. In fact, binge drinking as we know it today has brought about the exact recipe, the exact way that you can get alcohol poisoning. And then I let them know, some of you may be thinking, really, lady, because I see this all the time. I know you do on movies. I see this all the time and they're just fine. And I let them know that if you are thinking this way, you are right. Because this is what the youth party scene of today has turned into, sort of like a game of Russian roulette that goes like this. Who's going to get alcohol poisoning tonight? Who's going to get alcohol poisoning tonight and be with someone who knows this information, recognizes the symptoms, and saves your life? Who's going to get alcohol poisoning tonight and be with someone who is either educated in recognizing the symptoms or not, but chooses not to save your life? Because that is how most of our youth are dying from alcohol poisoning today. Someone didn't get help for them. To my horror, I also learned that there's a very comfortable feeling, there's a very comfortable feeling with being with or near or being yourself a vomiting person. And yet this is usually one of the first alarms that our body gives us naturally, that something is wrong. And it's not just saying that something's a little bit wrong with you. It's telling you that something is seriously wrong with your body. So I have them think of it this way. Let's take the flu. When we're sick, it's very common that if we have the flu, sometimes we throw up. We don't want to throw up, but it's a way that our body is trying to help us, and we throw up. Or how about bulimia, the subject bulimia? There was a time I remember we didn't know anything about that either, but we've learned a lot, haven't we? If you don't know, bulimia is when somebody makes themselves throw up for various reasons. And we've learned so much about that and how you can die from doing that to your body. And then I have them think of it this way, and it's I kind of act it out. So I show them, a little bottle, and I say, let's pretend that, your friend is having a get together, and she's asked you to come ahead of time, and help her clean up the place. And so you go to the door, knock, knock, and she answers it, and she's in a panic. She's like, I have a rat. And, that's common. Sometimes houses have rats. And so, she takes care of the problem before the guests come with some rat poisoning. But she accidentally forgets, and she puts the unmarked bottle on the table next to where, you're sitting, where people will sit on the couch. And so now we, go forward into the party, and you're sitting on the couch and you're having a good time, relaxing, hearing music, what we do at gatherings, talking to people. And all of a sudden someone comes next to you and they plop down on the couch and they're doing the same thing, but they grab that bottle and they drink it. And you're the only one who knows that what that person next to you just drank is rat poison. And very shortly after they drink it, they start exhibiting signs that they're not feeling good, holding their stomach, groaning, I'm not feeling good, and eventually vomiting. I put out there to the kids, what would you do in this situation? And of course, they yell back, call 911, call poison control, get help. They know this naturally. How do we know this? Well, we've been taught from the time we were little. We've been taught by our aunts, our uncles, our moms, our dads, sisters, brothers, teachers, you name it, have taught us about poison. And we know, no, you don't drink rat poison. There's certain plants you don't eat because it's poisonous and you could die. Then I go on to talk about alcohol. And I take the little bottle and I tell them that, I think of alcohol differently now. Our legal drug, we think it's safe, we're marketed to think that way, of course. I tell them that, I think of it as living on its own little cloud. And the reason that I say that is, we don't call it a poison and we don't call it a drug in our wonderful alcohol and drug classes. It's under its own little name, alcohol. Somehow it makes it separate. I know it did that in my mind against all the drugs that we had, even though I had a father who taught me of all the drugs. But for some reason, alcohol was put in a different box, a safer box in my mind. At a time when, I wouldn't touch a drug, but alcohol was not that to me. And the reality is it is a poison. And the name of that poison is ethanol. It's the same thing that's in our gasoline. And here's what really happens when alcohol poisoning strikes. What's really happening is an OD, an overdose of the poison ethanol. Yet in my mind, when I thought of OD, I thought of every single drug that we have in our world. But I never thought of alcohol that way. As unfair as this is, and to me, this is extremely unfair, but if you are a girl, your risk of alcohol poisoning is increased. And it's not just increased by a little bit. Sometimes it can be as much as 50% more than guys. And it's not so much our size and structure. It has more to do with how we break down our enzymes, how we break down the poison in our body. But that still doesn't mean that 300 plus pound guys, we have not lost to alcohol poisoning. One story shortly after my daughter's death was in Texas. Apparently now after prom, sometimes there's after prom parties. Can't get enough of the party scene, so they rent, and sometimes parents rent these rooms, and they had a big party afterwards. And when those kids woke up in the morning, their big guy friend was dead. Alcohol poisoning had struck again, only this time it was Texas. So as unfair as this seems, it is unfair. And this is at a time when our girls, stats are showing us that our girls are drinking more and more aggressively than they ever have before. And that makes sense, right? Because we have the hit of drinking games, and that creates this exact recipe because you're drinking faster and faster, and with our most potent alcohols in the world. So at this point, I have a break in the presentation, and what I do is I have a little drinking game skit. Of course, the kids don't know when I call the volunteers up on stage that this is what's going to happen. I just ask them to come up. I'm going to do a little skit, and we're going to do it to, break up the presentation and have a little fun. And so what the skit is, when they come on stage, I give each of them an 8-ounce water bottle. And I just tell them, we're going to have a little drinking game. We're just going to have a race. We're going to see who can drink their bottle the quickest. And so in high school and junior high, you will see the crowd just, erupt. Yeah, drinking game. And I make it, really fun. Okay, we're just going to do this really quick. And 1, 2, 3, go. And those kids drink of all different sizes, drink down this 8 fluid ounces of water very quickly, within seconds. And we have a winner. And then in our foundation, we have these wristbands that I give out when I come to presentations. And so I give them away as gifts and stuff. And before they sit down, I ask them, can you answer this question for me? Like, how do you feel? Do you feel like you have a little water in you? I know if we had another game, maybe a better prize, could you drink another one of these? And it's almost unanimous always. Oh, sure. Yeah, I could do that. And so we clap and thank you very much. And I have them sit down. And once they sit down, then I tell them, okay, that was for fun, but it was also, to share and teach with you what I've learned. And so I start showing them what I want them to do now is to visualize. that instead of this little 8-ounce bottle, I used to call them baby bottles of water when they first came out for my kids. I want you to visualize it being 8 fluid ounces of an 80 plus proof vodka. I tell them, if you've ever seen vodka, and of course there's many chuckles in the audience, unfortunately. It's clear like vodka. The consistency is the same. And if you were to smell it compared to all the other 80 plus proof and up alcohols in our world, the most potent, strongest ones we have, you're not going to get much of an odor with this one. And as I'm walking around with my bottle, showing them this so they have this visualization, then I let them know that after autopsy on my beautiful daughter's body, this and only this is what was found. And I let them know that after Shasta County's coroner's office came to my family with this information, I'm a very visual person. I learn that way. I like to see things visually. And I went to my own cupboard and I pulled out vodka, real vodka, and I measured 8 fluid ounces out because I didn't have this little bottle then, to see exactly what we're talking about. And as I looked at that amount, I asked myself, what? How could that be? I know that this girl has dumped that amount of alcohol, if not more, in her body. How could it be that this is what killed my beautiful daughter? And after that, I tell them, well, it's really simple, and I will show you. And you need to know this. Everybody needs to know this, from adults to children. So then I let them know that Shelby, she used to always tell me this, Mom, don't just tell me not to do something. Tell me the dynamics, why? Because that's how my brain works and how I understand it. And you know, isn't that how all our brains work? That's how we really understand something, is by knowing the dynamics. So we had a winner, or did we? So I always show them this. I have these 3 glasses. It's kind of hard to do. Usually I have a little table, but I'll do it the best I can for you. Okay, so 3 glasses here. Throughout the presentation are standing on a table and the kids are looking at these. And now at this point, I show them what they are. I show them that if you had a glass like this, and you were in an alcoholic establishment and you ordered a drink and it came in a glass like this, you know it would probably be beer. Beer, on average, is 10 to 12 ounces of alcohol. And then I showed them, and this little red ball that's been staring at you, that represents the ethanol in this particular glass of alcohol. And then we have this glass, which pretty much everyone recognizes that as the wine glass. Wine, on average, is approximately 4 to 5 ounces of alcohol. And again, the little red ball in this glass represents the ethanol, the poison in this particular glass of alcohol. And then we have the little shot glass. The shot glass, you know, I let them know that it reminds me of the 20s when there were cigarettes, right? I mean, the advertisement always showed, you know, everyone dressed up all pretty and that it was, you know, a cool thing to do. And, you know, we never saw the bad part of that until, you know, I was probably in my 40s or 30s when the advertisements started coming out of these same actors that I saw as a little kid, but now they had a hole in their throat or, you know, various conditions, all due to smoking. The shot glass, on average, always served with our most potent alcohols, 80% and up. 1 ounce is served with 1 ounce of alcohol. Unless you have, you know, a bartender who tops you off, now you're looking at about 1.5 ounces. of alcohol. And again, the little red ball represents the ethanol, the poison in this particular glass of alcohol. So then I show them that, you know, these 3 glasses, they're all the same. And how could that be? How could they be all the same? Because obviously they're very different in size. But the key is the little red balls. That shows you the amount of poison in each drink. And that part is the same. Now, you can drink a beer pretty fast, but it's going to be a little harder. And wine, the same thing. It's a sipping drink, but of course, someone could try and drink it fast. It would be not as easy as drinking the almighty, so popular shot with the most potent alcohol in it. So then I'm able to show them that, you know, we just had a contestant up here who drank 8 fluid ounces of water. But if that had been actual alcohol, vodka, that would have been 2 times the recipe to get alcohol poisoning. So what is the recipe? Well, and it's just approximate because a lot of things can make a difference. For instance, if you're fatigued, who would have thought? That could make a difference whether you fall into alcohol poisoning on the night you're drinking. Of course, additional medicines or medications, even down to that little aspirin, can make the difference. But we do have an approximate recipe, and that recipe is this: approximately 4 to 5 drinks in less than 2 hours time. We just had our contestants who drank like in seconds, 8 fluid ounces. That would be 2 times the recipe. And of course, all of them said, no problem, I could drink another one. Well, that would be 4 times the recipe to get alcohol poisoning. And when you've had the one-time recipe, now you're in the Russian roulette game. Because no matter what information I know now of alcohol poisoning, if I was in a room of people drinking, I could not guess who's going to get it, because we're in a game of Russian roulette. And most of the time, you know, we're fine. Just like a lot of the kids were thinking, we're fine. I see this all the time. But with today's binge drinking, the fast drinking, that's how quickly a child who's at the highest risk of dying can get into the recipe. And now they're in the game of Russian roulette. And their life is going to be dependent on who they're with, what knowledge they have to save their life, or if they choose to save the life. Because many of the cases, they choose not to for fear of getting in trouble. Something I have no concept of, because my moral value, I would drop everything and get in trouble with whatever to save a human life. But the reality is we've lost some of that value among our youth, I learned, in this day and age. The good news is the children are my fuel to keep going, because they learn when this little bit of information I show them, they learn. I get the emails that tell me how they either changed their ways of drinking or they saved a life. And that's the main deal of Shelby's rules, is to save a life. Not for me to judge you, just save a life if something goes wrong. For a young girl of Shelby's 107 5/6 frame, as little as 8 ounces of an 80 proof vodka over an hour or 2 can lead to coma and death if no medical care is provided. I also show them now a visualization of blackout. I was shocked to learn about blackout. I learned that when you black out, you are, you're the lucky one if you wake up. You're so close to death. And I use this visualization to show them. I ask them to visualize a shelf, and I'm going to pick up blackout and I'm going to place it on top of the shelf. And what I want you to know from my heart is the shelf underneath blackout, that's the death zone. And the lucky ones wake up, the unlucky ones don't. Because it is thought of as such a common thing to black out and even talk about it. And it's not. It means that you're in trouble, you're in danger, you've been alcohol poisoned. So then at this point, you know, I let them know that, okay, well, I've showed you all this information, but what does that really look like, you know? And so then I have us go back to that party. And, you know, I tell them, I wish I had learned this and had this visual when I was younger. In my day, they taught us about alcohol made your brain bleed, okay? And I remember it was a film and they showed two brains and they sliced them like a loaf of bread, and one was bleeding and one wasn't. And so the person who drank has the bleeding brain, and the one who didn't, you know, didn't have a bleeding brain. And it was horrifying during the film, but of course it was very much forgotten afterwards, you know. And so so what I do is I go through and I act it out, but I go through to show them exactly what goes on. How does all this really happen? So you're back at that party and you're drinking your drink, and of course anything you eat or drink goes down to your stomach. And then I let them know that from that point, very quickly, the poison ethanol from the alcohol goes into your bloodstream very quickly. And from there, it travels up to your brain. And I let them know that if you ever want to know, you know, just how fast that happens, well, when you feel that first euphoria, that means that the poison ethanol has arrived at your brain. And from there, the brain tells your body and your organs, slow everything down, and eventually can say, shut everything down. Okay, well, like what? Well, unfortunately, all those things that we need to keep living, like our heartbeat, our breathing, our gag reflex. Before all this, I had no clue what a gag reflex is, but I know now. Basically, it's a flap somewhere here. And when the brain tells it to shut down, that's exactly what happens. It won't open. And what it does is, if we vomit, it opens up and it allows our vomit to come out of our body. But if it shuts down, it won't. But that doesn't mean that the body in this condition will not still vomit. It will. And the vomit will either go into your lungs and drown you to death, or that's when you hear of people choking because it's trying to come out the throat, and then you are choked to death. So, you know, I tell them it's really important to have these things, you know, happen, right? And then maybe you see someone at this party and, you know, they're kind of walking, you know, unsteady. And so I go through that and let them know what those stages are, you know, and they're talking with blurred, you know, with their mouth, barely making sentences. It's called a stupor. And when you see someone in that condition, they are alcohol poisoned. At that point, that is an alcohol poisoned person. I would have never known that. I do know that now. The poisoning has started. It's at 1 degree. And then perhaps it goes to where you're back on that couch and, you know, you're barely talking, barely conscious, semi-conscious behavior. And the alcohol poisoning is worse. And then I take the bottle and I drop it on the ground and I say, and then unconscious behavior. And I go through the skit where, you know, in this day and age, you know, kids have reports are, you know, ooh, let's take pictures of the unconscious person, and they send them out. It's so funny. It's so funny. And oh, I know, let's get a marker and mark them up and wait till they wake up in the morning. It's going to be so funny to them. But I tell them that it's not funny, and here's why. Scott Roberts, I give them some stories, you know, real life stories. Scott Roberts, shortly after I lost my daughter, San Diego, California. We went and presented the first time his parents had ever been back at the school. It was a very, very hard presentation. Scott Roberts was 16. He was a freshman, brand new in high school. He had just knew that he was going to be on the football team. He was so excited. His dad is an attorney in San Diego, his mom a teacher. And Scott mom had been on an overnight conference with her work on a Friday night, and Scott had came to his father with a friend he'd known since kindergarten and another new friend, and asked if he could spend the night at the new friend's house. And, it was a normal Friday night, and, his dad said, okay. But what Dad didn't know was that the new kid in town, had been kicked out of a few schools for drug and alcohol. And that his mom, a single mom, was off in Hawaii and had left her teenage son there alone, but not totally alone. There was alcohol in the house. And of course, the boys started drinking. And that next morning, Scott Roberts was dead. And what do you think it told his beautiful sisters and his parents? That his body was all marked up with horrible sayings on it. It told them this, that while their son was dying, their friends were laughing and marking him up while his body was dying. Because then I tell them, what about this one? You're back at that party and you look at the time and you go, oh my gosh, I got to get home. I got in trouble last week. I got to get home. And you go to your friend who's, you think, sleeping on the ground, and you grab her hand and you yell and say, Cindy, come on, Cindy. And she does not wake up, and you yell her name as loud as you can, and you get nothing, not even a grunt. Well, that's because the body is not sleeping. It's a dying body, an alcohol poisoned dying body. First rule of Shelby's rules is if you can't wake them up, you must call for help. 911, emergency medical help. And I try to make them understand it in normal terms. Like if your mother had been sleeping, and she hadn't been drinking, she was just taking a nap, right? And you had a practice to go to. And you looked at the time, oh my gosh, we're going to be late. And you go into your mom's room and you say, Mom, wake up, Mom, wake up. And she doesn't wake up. What would you naturally think? You would think, I have an emergency, situation, right? Because everybody wakes up. It doesn't matter how heavy of a sleeper you are. All human bodies wake up. Why is it that we've gotten to a point where when someone has drank a poison that we think it's okay? They're just sleeping it off. They're not. And that's what we need to know worldwide about this. We need to think of alcohol for what it is, and that is a poison that can hurt us, that can kill us. Our daughter made a poor choice that night. She'd be the first one, if she survived here, to let you know that she did. But that choice should have never led to her death. It's the hard truth that despite a parent's best efforts to protect their children, in the end, your safety, your children's safety, your very life can come down to the people that you are with, knowing what they know and how to ask for help. And that's why I like when I give presentations to also give parent presentations so that everybody's on the same page, and there never has to be that one child that has to be the thumb that is trying to convince others that there's a problem. Now, we truly hope we never ever have to have a problem. But it's like anything we do. We want to know the safeguards in case and recognize symptoms so that we know how to save a life when something goes bad. Nowadays, unfortunately, and I just don't understand this, but the reality is we even have adults and parents serving or supplying alcohol. In fact, I had kids that were friends of Shelby's that came to me after we lost her and told me how they had been at a friend's birthday party. And this particular parent who knew my daughter throughout her life of schooling was supplying alcohol, just like the house where Shelby died. Why those parents, they prided themselves in how they taught their children how to drink, something we really can't do because now we know about the frontal lobe area and how children, you can't teach them to drink correctly because their makeup, they're not developed there yet. Here's the difference. I can have this one drink and, you know, I'm going to retain all my right or wrong thinking. A child, an underage person, one drink, and they can lose all right or wrong thinking. That's why many times you'll hear a parent say, why my child knows not to get in a car with someone who's been drinking. But when all that frontal lobe or right or wrong drinking has left, they don't have that to be able to make those critical decisions. So supplying alcohol, not just their kids, but others, thinking it's safer because, you know, they are going to drink anyways, and it's better than having them out on a field somewhere. Well, I guarantee you that they know nothing about alcohol poisoning and how youth are at the most risk and how easily they could wake up either to their own child dead one morning or somebody else's. It's our deepest desire that no other families or friends will have to endure the pain of loss that we experience, not just every day of our lives, but every second. We look normal, we laugh, we do things. We've decided to move on in this world, but I'm in pain every second of my life without my Shelby. That is my sad story, but I don't have to let it happen to someone else. So my first thought when I learned all this information was, oh my God, our youth are partying in the most dangerous way you can consume alcohol, and they don't know a way that can kill them very quickly. And I have to tell. And instantly, Shelby's Rules was born to save lives. And my husband's, his thoughts were, we have to tell. It would be wrong if we didn't. And so Shelby's Rules was born. What is Shelby's Rules? Alcohol plus non-responsiveness equals 911. If you can't wake them up, you must call for help. And then there's warning signs, which we went over. Vomiting. Vomiting is your first danger sign if you're lucky that somebody is in alcohol poisoning. Slow breathing, the body goes into hypothermia. Think of it this way, if you knew someone who hadn't been drinking and they're barely breathing, what would we think? Naturally, we have a medical problem. Well, that's the same way if they've been drinking a poison. Low body temperature, blue lips, fingertips, the body goes into hypothermia. Convulsions. On the text, one of the texts said that Shelby was snoring and shaking. She was in convulsions at that time. Semi or unconsciousness must stay with the victim, and you tilt their head to the right in the hopes of that you're opening up that passageway where the gag reflex has shut down until help gets there. Just in case the body vomits, because even though the body is unconscious, it can still vomit. Myths. These are real important. They've been around for many years. I remember these ones. And it's simply, and even that night in the text and afterwards with emails that I got from kids talking, you know, they believe that vomiting removes the alcohol. Well, how I showed you how quickly the alcohol goes into the blood system, bloodstream, whatever amount of vomiting comes out of the stomach, it's very little because very quickly that alcohol has went into the bloodstream. Food soaks up the alcohol. The same thing. We know that Shelby had just ate that night. The same thing. It goes in so quickly that what little bit food soaks up, it's not enough to make a difference. Here's one: coffee to sober up. Only time can sober up a person. And I didn't know that one. I remember give them coffee or throw them in the shower. And this is a very important one. Shower to sober them up. Never, ever put an alcohol poisoning victim into a cold shower. The shock of the water on their body could send their system and shock them into a coma. And I have a story in Gilroy, California, of a 15-year-old beautiful girl. Friends, yes, they had snuck and drank. And the girl of the home, and unlike in our case, did the right thing and went and got her parents to help. And the mom was helping with the girls. And as girls would do, they said, hey, why don't we put our bathing suits on and wash off the vomit? And when that happened, the young girl who was sick went into unconsciousness, a coma in the hospital, and she never came back to this world. The coroner never came out with a formal that this is what happened, but a coroner will only say what they absolutely know. And so I highly suspect that this is exactly what happened. So never, ever shower a person who is in trouble. And, you know, like I said, that has been around for many years. Shelby's friends, they didn't know she was going to die that night, but she did. And that's the point. And now you know her story. And you can help spread those seeds of Shelby's education among the world so that one day we know worldwide, like we know about rat poison. There's no reason that we should ever lose a child's life again to this. And I always let them know that they're the ones that keep me going. I can't tell you the stories of when I've wanted to maybe, this is too huge and I need to quit. And then in comes that email of a child who saved another child's life and thanked it all to Shelby, not me. I'm the messenger. This is my daughter. This is my daughter's soul and her love for life. So that's it. Thank you very much. I've never presented this way, so this is different, not having the feedback with the children. But I will tell you that the children are amazing. They get it. And if there's one word of advice that Steve and I, when we've had parents come up and they're afraid, you know, what can I do? What can I do? I'm so afraid. Usually they're the parents, I can tell, that are feeding alcohol to kids and didn't know this information. And one of the things that we've always said is stop the sleepovers. Pick your child up late at night, you know, whatever is going on, but have them in your home. If I was to do this all over again, I would not have sleepovers at my house either, even though I trust me. But I see how things can slip through you in this day and age. So, you know, if you have your children at home where it's all safe and, you know, then all is good. Let them have fun, take them wherever, pick them up late, but have them at home. And it's a hard one in America to have that wave hasn't taken on to change that in our society. So thank you very much. And, you guys can take it away now.
Thanks, Debbie, so much. Is really you're so right. We need to know where our kids are and not just leave them because nothing bad will happen. That whole notion can't exist anymore. My kids, they go crazy. They want to go over to a friend's house who we don't know, and I'm like, I don't know their family, so
Right.
no. Until I know their family, they can come over here,
Right.
but until I know the situation, so. It's so important. And one of the things that I always tell my kids when they come into peer pressure situations If you don't know what to say, just say my dad would kill me. My dad would be saying, use me.
Well, and
me as
speaking
an
of peer
excuse.
pressure too, that was the thing with Shelby. She shocked the community because she was the child that, this, you never would have dreamed this could happen to her. But that's the point. Like you said earlier, it can happen to any one of us. And of course, with anything, the more information we know about what is true and what the reality is, then, this will happen less. I am happy to report that when I started this, I would receive a lot of Googles all the time, things that the general public didn't see of this happening a lot. I have seen a slowdown, but it's still not over, So, and parents need to know this. They need to know that I understand you don't want your child maybe out in the world drinking, but having it's applying it or turning your head to it or joining in on it, they are not equipped to drink alcohol. And, Steve and I, we're not anti-alcohol. We have a vineyard. I, as an adult, enjoy sipping wine, but I think of it so much differently now. Now I know really, truly what it is. It is a poison. I'm not putting the most healthy thing in my body when I sip some wine. And so it changes the knowledge of knowing this, changes your thoughts on it a lot. And all of us make better choices, if we decide to make that choice. But the most important thing is, children have always been so important to me, and they're the ones that are at the highest risk of dying very quickly. And I have the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories, unfortunately, to show.
Yeah, sadly, we have those own similar stories that exist in our membership and in our board. I was getting private messages throughout your presentation, how close this is hitting home to so many that are just on today's webinar. And I know quite a few who were not able to jump on today have very similar stories and could give the same type of presentation just about the dangers of over drinking. I mean, just it's insane. And would like to point back to a recent podcast that we did. Go to Let's Talk Prevention Idaho. We did have a gentleman from actually out in Europe who wrote a book about the dangers of alcohol, and actually has a test that you can take to see what you know about the dangers of alcohol. And one of the things that kept coming up in our conversation on the podcast was we need to first start off with saying there's nothing good about alcohol. Nothing positive is going to happen to you because you consumed alcohol. So we need to take that notion and put it right there. And he and I talked about the way alcohol is attached to societal things like concerts and sporting events and stuff. And
Right.
My wife and I just went to a Kane Brown concert last weekend or the weekend after, and the amount of alcohol that was consumed, I actually literally had a young lady pass out next to my wife, and I had to prop her up and get the venue to get me medical attention because all she was doing all night was just pounding glass after
Right.
glass after glass of alcohol.
Well,
and nobody knew what to do. Everybody was just like, oh, it's just a crazy girl who's been bouncing all over the place. Now she's finally quiet. And I'm like, no. If she's not bouncing anymore, there's a problem. We need to get medical attention to her. So it's just as important for us as adults to know when we go out into our social situations, when someone's over consuming, we need to be able to remember the bare facts is don't let them sit down, get medical attention right away, try to keep them awake. All the things you spoke about, trying to drill to our kids, we also need to remember for ourselves, because none of us are sticks in the mud. We like to go out and have a good time.
Right. And the kids are the most, it's amazing how these kids, after my presentation, have done this. They have actually saved a life. And what you were talking about earlier too, we actually, I think it was Solano County in California, did a tape years ago when I first started this, and we saw it. And it was so interesting because what it did, it showed in black and white our time, like probably the 70s or wherever, And then in color, it showed now's time, what happened with alcohol. And it showed exactly what you said. It said there was a time, it was like a cloud that kept moving. There was a time when you'd go to a fair and, if there was any alcohol drinking, it was hidden, from the children, right? And it showed as time went on, even where advertisements on a like 7-Eleven, you go in and there's alcohol advertisement on the counter below, how that isn't for us, that is for kids. So they get used to the thought of alcohol around, and then when they become a teen, and are introduced, and it's okay. The alcohol industry doesn't care if you're an alcoholic because that's more money for them, right? And also a lot of people in California didn't know. In fact, when I went and presented at our, with the assembly, in the assembly and testified, one of the assembly women went, I thought this was illegal in the household for adults to serve alcohol, right? Well, here's the thing. In the early, and she was right. Yeah, in our time, that's how we knew it. I can remember my parents say, if you kids do anything under my roof, we could lose everything, right? But what happened was in the early 70s, the alcohol industry was growing more, and they got into and lobbied, and Governor Brown, young Jerry Brown was our governor then, and they lobbied and was able, households, parents were starting to party in the home then, and so they wanted them to. So they were able to get legislation that gave complete immunity in the household if alcohol was involved. So in other words, if you have a child and they're in a house in California and say that a fan fell on their head and they have brain damage, and of course you're going to go and get, medical help through the courts. But if alcohol was involved, then complete immunity for that homeowner. That's how it still is in California. We were able to tweak it a bit. We were able to go there. And so now it's like, if you see the parents giving this, but how many times is that possible? No, it's really hard. So it still needs to be changed back to how it was. And then people do stop, right? Because there's a consequence.
Yeah.
Whether they agree or not, there's a consequence to this behavior. And it's there for the safety of children, mainly,
It's so bad in California. Many cities have had to craft their own social host ordinances to create more stricter penalties, heavier consequences, because the state has done so little to protect our children in those situations, or even just to make sure that there's consequences levied at the person who is hosting the event. Right. So I actually,
and one of the people I've been involved, in fact, I was involved in our town and we couldn't get it passed because one of the main people who fight it are parents and adults, where I would think that would be the first thing you would want to have happen to protect all children, right? Because that's what it's mainly for. And, but we have a world now, unfortunately, I learned, where there's parents that actually have a raw good time with the kids in this scene. Can't wait. And so, there's been surveys I've read, Auburn, California, 40% of the kids there said they got their alcohol from the parents. So it's a uphill fighting battle, right? And so, yeah, really, there should be just a nationwide. Well, here it is, and you don't get to do this. And if you disagree with it, that's okay. Either face the consequence or just don't, but that makes people not do it, right? I always use the hit and run law. Okay. We probably have all been in an accident and it's not a good feeling, and part of you feels like, oh God, I just wish I wasn't here. Can I be back in bed this morning? But we have a very strict law nationwide. Felony, hit and run. If you run and you leave that scene, big or small accident, you have a felony now, and so that stops most of the time people from running, right? We still have a few runners, but basically it stops. So it's I know that a lot of people, especially in this day and age, don't like this control deal, but in society, sometimes we need these perimeters to keep everybody safe.
Yeah.
And this is one of them.
Does anybody have any questions for Debbie? I do know that she will be heading up north in 7 days. You'll be in Kamiah with Charlene Johnson's coalition. So I know Amy. I don't know. You're pretty far still away from Kamiah, but I would like to let anybody know if they would like to have Debbie out to speak to their youth or whatever. If there is any type of funding opportunity, is there any way that CCI can help facilitate and make sure that that happens? Please feel free to reach out to us, reach out to Chloe or I, and we can look at what you need to make that happen, and we can facilitate. Because I think we need to diversify the people that are speaking to our youth. Our youth need to hear multiple different people telling them. I know we all have our favorites. I'm just as guilty of that as anyone else. But what's really nice, and what was really nice that came out of the Workforce Development Committee's work was opportunities like this. Had the Workforce Development Committee not introduced Chloe and I to Debbie, I'm not quite sure we would have ever had a chance to meet her, or it would have happened much farther down the road. And that goes for a lot of the webinars and other opportunities that we've had over the last year and a half. It's collaborative effort and sharing from you guys of your knowledge, of your resources, that we're able to offer statewide to all the coalitions that are members with CCI, and as well as strengthening our partners. Our partners are only as strong as the communities that engage back with them. If the partners didn't have anybody engaging back with them, then their funding would just come and go, and nothing long-term would happen with that. So really want to thank you, Debbie, for taking some time out of your day to meet with us virtually. I'm glad you were able to get one of these virtual things out of the way. Hopefully COVID calms down to where you don't have to do too many more of these, but at least you know it's possible now. You survived.
I
you survived
do, yeah.
virtual webinar,
I kept looking at me. Yeah, it's different. You know, there's more interaction, of course, when I'm presenting on stage or with the kids. And yeah, so this is, you know, a little bit different, but I just kept going as I do. And, you know, when I present to them, you know, it's more like love to them, caring, and I let them know that I wish I could push a button and keep them all safe, but that's not possible. So this is the next best thing. Here's the information. You get to make your choices from what you know. But if you don't know, that's not fair, is it? And bad things can happen. So yeah, thank you, you guys. And yes, I think there's been one presentation I never made because I was sick. But other than that, if anyone wants one, I go in a heartbeat as soon as we can arrange it, because it's important for me, for the children.
We'll be there next week.
And we'll be there next week, yeah. And in there's another little town we're going to too. But I can't remember the name of it. Do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, which
we
is
will,
close by.
So we are recording this. So we'll get this recording up on YouTube, and as soon as we have it up on YouTube, we will send out the link to everybody, and we'll also send you Debbie's contact information to Shelby's Rules, so that you can link up with her. And like I said before, if there's anything that CCI can do to facilitate making sure that we get appropriate speakers into our state and into our different communities, feel free to let us know, get us involved in that process. We would love to see what we can do to make sure that that all these opportunities happen. So thank you so much, Debbie, and safe travels next week. And tell Shelby we said hi.
I will.